The Seventh Tower by Garth Nix. Book 4, Above the Veil. Chapter 16. Tal was surprised by how the castle was transformed by the day of Ascension. With all the Chosen retiring to their rooms to lie down and transfer their spirits to Einir, and their spirit shadows going with them, the castle was left largely to the Underfolk. It was eerie and still in the corridors. Tal couldn't help but think of what he should be doing. He should be with his family in their quarters, lying down on his bed with the specially embroidered cover, waiting for his father to stand over him with his sunstone to guide him in the crossing. He had never felt so alone. It was strange to see so many Underfolk about, too. They chose to use this time in a sudden frenzy to get to work on all the major and intrusive jobs of maintenance, repair, and construction that could not be done while the Chosen were up and about. Even down on Underfolk 7, where Tal and Crow stopped to get backpack sprayers of cave roach poison, there was considerable bustle and preparation. Underfolk store people were issuing tools and paint, lumber and screws, brushes and mops, replacement pipes and fixtures, and all manner of other things to a steady stream of men and women. As Crow had said, these Underfolk, fatalists, as he called them, seemed very keen to get on with their work. Tal would have thought they would use the opportunity of the Chosen's absence in Einir to have a rest. But there was no sign of this. They were totally focused on their tasks. Tal and Crow wore their masks, and Tal noticed everyone gave them a wide berth. Obviously, Crow had not exaggerated about the poison. It seemed the other Underfolk feared to touch even the clothes of the cave roach sprayers, and perhaps because this embarrassed them, did not look at Tal or Crow either. This was just as well, Tal thought, because Adris was having trouble being a natural shadow. He was always a bit behind, so that when Tal turned a corner, his shadow would keep on going for a moment, and then hastily correct itself. No one seemed to have noticed so far, but it was making Tal very anxious. Still, as long as they stayed out of the Chosen's individual chambers, or some of the specialized areas like the Imperial antechambers where Chosen slept and their spirit shadows guarded both them and the rooms, Tal and Adris should be safe from recognition. It took nearly the whole day to climb up from Underfolk 7 to the highest level of Red, where they could begin the climb to the Red Tower, though it was also possible to get to the tower from some of the higher color levels. Normally, Tal would have taken less than an hour to climb the steps and ramps, but they had to stop all the time and climb into drains or pipes or other out-of-the-way places to spray for cave roaches. After a while, Tal noticed that Crow was watching him as they sprayed, almost as if he expected something to happen. Tal watched him too, mindful of Ebbett's advice to change the mask Crow had given him. But he wasn't sure if that was simply Ebbett's usual weirdness, or because his great-uncle expected Crow to have picked a defective mask for Tal. Certainly Crow seemed to be making an effort to be friendly. His verbal attacks of the previous day were gone, and when he spoke, it was simply to instruct Tal on how to spray, or how to act like an Underfolk. Maybe his watching was also only to make sure Tal was staying in character. Maybe Crow wasn't waiting for him to suddenly pass out and die from the poison. Tal couldn't make up his mind either way, but he decided to be careful. From the high Red Commons, the huge chamber that in other times would be full of Chosen of the Red Order meeting to gossip and socialize, Tal thought there would be a stairway that led both to the foundation room of the Red Tower and a narrow walkway that ran outside around the base of the tower. When Tal had climbed the Red Tower before, he'd started higher up in the orange levels on a similar walkway, then climbed down and across to the red walkway, where he had launched his assault on the Red Tower. Though he'd never been in the high Red Commons before, Tal was certain that the layout would be the same as the high Orange Commons. When he saw the huge chamber, he knew that he was correct. Though it was furnished differently, with many low lounges upholstered in bright red cloth, rather than the individual crystal chairs of the Orange Commons, the stairway was in the same corner. No more than 2 stretches wide, and without railings, it ran up into the ceiling high above. Like the one in the Orange Commons, Tal suspected it was hardly ever used. "That's it," he said to Crow, pointing. "Good," said Crow. He looked around, making sure that the whole chamber really was empty. Then he shrugged off his backpack sprayer and put it carefully upright against one of the lounges. Tal did the same, then they both backed away. "Don't touch your gauntlets after they're off," instructed Crow. He showed Tal how to loosen both of them and then shake them off, rather than taking one off and then wondering what to do with the other. They left the gauntlets and retreated again, to kick off their clogs and remove their outer robes. The lighter robes underneath were soaked with sweat and very clammy. Both boys had knives scabbarded on their sashes, and Tal wore his sunstone ring openly. Any chosen or spirit shadow that saw them would know instantly that they were some kind of enemy.
"Can I stop being a stupid regular shadow now?"
asked Adris plaintively as Tal headed for the steps. The spirit shadow lifted his head up as he spoke, though he kept Tal's basic shape. It looked very strange, as if Tal's shadow had somehow gotten curled up. "When we're outside," Tal promised. As they climbed the steps, Crow suddenly asked Tal a series of questions about the keystones. "Did your father ever tell you about how these keystones work?" Crow asked when they were halfway up. "No," Tal replied. His leg was hurting him again. The steps were steep, and it would be easy to fall off. He needed all his concentration. "I mean, this guardian job seems to get passed on down the family. He might have mentioned it." Tal shrugged and shook his head. "What about old John's notion that they can't be moved? Do you think he's right?" "I don't know." They were almost at the top. The door was probably locked, but Tal could melt the lock with his sunstone. He'd stolen the key to the orange door, but had long since lost it. "They had to be put there in the first place," muttered Crow. "I bet they can be moved. We should take it away, so we're the ones who can use it." Tal ignored him, pausing to get his breath back before he tried to open the door. It was barred on the inside, but the bar came free easily enough. Tal leaned it on the steps and tried the door again. It was locked. "I'll open it," said Crow, as Tal peered at the lock and the gap between the door and the door frame. "Let me past." In his eagerness to get at the door, Crow pushed Tal slightly, and the chosen boy had to grab the iron staple that had held the bar to avoid falling off. It was a long way to the bottom, far enough to be fatal, and Tal knew Adris probably wasn't smart enough to have caught him if he fell. But the push had seemed accidental. "Oh, sorry," said Crow. Tal retreated a few steps down as Crow pulled a ring of keys out of his sleeve pocket and selected one to put in the lock. Then he inserted a strip of thin metal as well, and turned both of them. The lock turned easily, and the door swung open. The light from the sunstones in the chamber spilled out, but was swallowed by the darkness beyond. A freezing wind blew in, rattling the door and sweeping back the two boys' hair, stinging their faces and eyes. Crow seemed paralyzed. He stood there, his keys in his hand, staring out into the eternal night beyond the narrow walkway. "Welcome to the dark world," said Tal.